Hey guys, I'm really excited for this week's episode. We have Jacob Morgan. He's the author of The Future of Work. And this is a really good book that I'm reading right now. It's actually been making me think a lot because I think we all know that millennials are entering the workplace, and that means a lot of things are changing and it's getting a lot more attention right now. But it's getting me to ask questions like, what is work going to look like, and how am I going to stay relevant given all these changes, and how will I future-proof my career? And so you definitely want to check out this book because it helps you to get ahead of the curve and understand what is the future going to be like, and how can you prepare yourself and make yourself competitive and actually get you thinking a lot differently about work than you do currently. So definitely check out this book because it's definitely going to help you stay ahead of that. Next, I really want to talk about Jacob because my conversation with him was really interesting because he's got a very unique career path and he didn't take the traditional path. And that means he has a lot of very unique perspectives on what a career even means and how to even think about careers in general and how to make yourself marketable and how to get skills. And so he's got a very untraditional approach that I guarantee a lot of you have not thought of before. So you'll definitely want to check out this episode and definitely check out his book afterwards. Okay, so Jacob, before we get into the future of work and how to future-proof your career, I'm really curious. You took a really non-traditional approach to your career. So could you share with us a little bit why you did that, some of the decisions you made, and a little background?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I thought my traditional career path would be go to school, you go work for a company for a couple years, you go back and get your MBA, and then you go back and work for another company for, the rest of your life, and go back and you climb the corporate ladder and hopefully become an executive. For me, I was really interested in marketing at the time, so I was like, oh, cool, I'll go back and get my MBA, and maybe one day I'll be a CMO or a director of marketing or a VP of marketing. And so that's what I thought my career path and trajectory was going to be. So worked really hard in college. I went to a community college first where I did really poorly. My GPA in community college was like a 2.8. And then after I went to UC Santa Cruz for the remaining 2 years, I did really well there, graduated with honors, double majored in economics and psych, and went to go work for my first company in LA. Super excited about it. I had an hour and a half commute to and from each way, which I was willing to forego because I thought that it was going to be an exciting opportunity. I was told I'd be traveling, doing biz dev, meeting with a lot of great people, and basically it sounded like an awesome job. And so I said, sure, I'd love to work here. A couple of months in, I was doing data entry and PowerPoint presentations and cold calling. And I just thought, this is, really not what I signed up for and what I want to do. And so one day the CEO comes out of his office and he asks me to go get him a cup of coffee. At that point, I realized that my career path would be taking a dramatic different turn, and working for others was not a good fit for me. I had one other experience like that when I moved to the Bay Area. I had a pass to go to a conference, a free pass, and basically the company wouldn't let me go to the conference for no apparent reason other than just I couldn't go. So shortly after that, I quit the job and went to the conference anyway. It was the best decision I've ever made. So, after that, I realized I was a slave to this company. I couldn't even go outside. And so I decided to start freelancing. And I did all sorts of freelance work. I did, it's my little dog going crazy in the background. I did search engine optimization work. I did online marketing and social media work. I did all sorts of things. I mean, you name it, and I was probably doing it. Writing articles for $15 an article, and that just kind of evolved and built up into where I am today. So, never planned it. Never knew that the future of work would be an area I'd be involved in. Never planned on writing books or speaking, none of that stuff. Just kind of out of my deep passion and desire to not work for other people came this.
That's interesting because, now I see you kind of touring the offices of LinkedIn, and but you're more of taking an approach from looking at from as an outsider. So how did it get to the point where you decided you were really going to focus on the future of work, and what inspired you to do that?
I was first very involved in the enterprise collaboration space. That was my first,
Hmm.
what the topic of my first book was, how to make these collaborative technologies and platforms work. And the future of work just kind of evolved out of that. I just started, a lot of the companies that I was speaking with, they were not only concerned about collaboration, but they were interested in millennials and management and corporate culture and how all these things were changing. And so I thought, oh, that's interesting. The future of work was a topic that I um, first thought of around a decade ago when I was in college, but I was like, I don't really know what that means. I don't know where that's going to go. I should be more specific, more focused. And then, a couple years later, after I wrote that first book, the future of work just seemed like a relevant place to go. I started seeing people talk about that and sort of bringing all these pieces together. And I thought, all right, I'm going to go all in and write a book on that topic. And, it was a good time for it. So,
Got it. Okay. So that brings me to the millennial topic. I know you write a lot about that a lot in your book, and I'm about halfway through, so I'm not quite finished yet. But I'll let you know what I think when I'm done.
please do.
With the millennials entering the workplace, I'm a millennial, but I'm starting to see it a
Same
little
here.
bit. Oh, are you? Okay,
Yeah.
great. So, what do you think that means? What are the biggest implications? I know we hear a lot of misconceptions about millennials based on what you know about them, but what do you think the biggest thing to look out for
Yeah,
changes?
there are a lot of different things depending on the study that you look at. Yeah, I always tell companies if you get rid of everybody that's a millennial, you're still going to have people that care about flexible work and meaningful work and having a good relationship with their boss and equal high compensation. Like these aren't just millennial attributes; these are attributes for any employee that is sort of changing their attitudes and behaviors about the workplace. What's really interesting about millennials is, a lot of them don't know what it's like to commute an hour and a half to and from work, to sit in a cubicle, to get 300 emails a day. So there are some differences. I think the fact that millennials are going to be the dominant population in the workforce is actually a good thing because it's forcing these organizations to change. They're realizing that they want to attract and retain this new generation of worker, and so it's acting as a very powerful catalyst to force organizations to rethink all their outdated policies and programs that they have. So I think from that perspective, it's a good thing. Um, a lot of media outlets are trying to make millennials out to be like they're these weird aliens coming from another planet. They're just gonna like wreak havoc everywhere. And it's not necessarily the case. I mean, throughout the history of business, there have always been multiple generations that have had to learn to work together. This time, it's no different. I think there's a lot that millennials can bring to the table. There's a lot that millennials can learn from other generations. But we have to remember that a lot of managers and executives today are eligible to retire, and a lot of those roles are going to millennials. So this brings with it a new way of working, new technologies that are used. So I think it's actually a very, very good thing that we're seeing.
So you think the things millennials want and are pushing for are only going to benefit everybody?
Yeah, it's not just that millennials are the only ones that want them. It's the fact that since the millennials are the majority of the workforce population, it's now really being paid attention to and heard. Right? Even before millennials joined the workforce, I'm sure there, many people still cared about flexible work and many people cared about compensation. But I feel like a lot of those voices and discussions were drowned out a little bit. But now that
Hmm.
so many millennials, 50% of the workforce by 2020, 75% of the workforce by 2025, it's a huge number.
Hmm.
And so I feel like now this discussion is being amplified because companies can't afford to not pay attention to this. And we have a lot of new things happening in the world, right? I mean, organizations are shifting away from creating an environment where they assume people need to work there to creating a place where people actually want to work there. So we see a lot of different dynamics happening. In the book at the beginning, I talk about 5 trends shaping the future of work.
Hmm.
Millennials are one of those trends. Changing demographics is one of those 5 trends, but there are still a bunch of other factors that are at play that are shaping and changing the way organizations are getting things done.
I don't think your dog's happy in the background over there.
No, she growls at all sorts of weird things.
No, that's interesting because I think, yeah, I read in your book, I think you say that millennials' tenure is 3 years or less, and I think that's probably playing into it a little bit. They want to keep them longer, so they're
What's
looking at
actually
their needs. Or...
less, I'm trying to remember where I saw this recent statistic, and I can't remember if it was just for the Bay Area or not, but it was scary statistic where it was now that millennials were around a year and a half.
Wow.
Yeah, and again, it depends on the research study that you read because different studies have different numbers.
Hmm.
But there have been all sorts of studies that millennials are already, and not just millennials, but other generations as well. They're already looking for their next job by the time they take the job that they currently were given. So, like on day one, they're already looking for other opportunities and ways to move up. And
Wow, that's
so,
insane.
yeah, I mean, think about LinkedIn recruiting, right? I mean, as soon as you
Right.
take a job somewhere, you get a LinkedIn recruiter that says, "Hey, Olivia, I noticed you just took a job at Google. We have a really cool opportunity here at Yahoo or whatever that we'd like to talk to you about.
Hmm.
Why don't we chat?" And it just makes it so easy with technology to be able to take employees and shift and job hop and move around. So,
Yeah, yeah,
I
that's
mean, I
crazy.
see I see my friends on LinkedIn, my connections, and I see the tenure. Athena, I see that the tenure of the people that I'm connected with on LinkedIn. I mean, I'm amazed. Some people are staying at jobs for 6, 7 months, and these are VP, SVP level roles.
Wow.
And I'm just looking at their LinkedIn profile, and they're like, "Oh, VP here, SVP there," and I'm like, these are 8 months to a year. Um, but I also think the Bay Area is its own weird little
Hmm.
bubble in some way as well. So I don't think that what's happening here is happening everywhere, but I think it's a good indicator of what could happen.
No, that's good to know. Yeah, I think the Bay must be pretty competitive up there, it sounds like. So, you've mentioned that freelancers and independent contractors are going to be growing in the workforce. So, how do
Yes.
you think those that are early in their career will be impacted and how should they react to that?
Um, so a couple of different things actually. I mean, if you're early on in your career, you need to decide what kind of career you want to have. I mean, even the word career is kind of funny, right? Because do you want to go work for a company or do you want to go start your own business and become an Uber or a Lyft driver or create a profile on Upwork, which used to be Elance and Odesk, or do you want to sell products on Etsy direct to consumers? Do you want to go work for a startup? Do you want to raise money on Indiegogo or GoFundMe? You have a lot of options and opportunities for what you want to do and how you want to do it. Of course, the traditional career path of going to work for a company and moving up the corporate ladder is still an option there too. But I think today, if you're early on in your career, you have much more flexibility and choice for what you want to do and how you want to do it and where you see yourself going. So I think that's something that a lot of people entering the workforce need to think about is where they want to go, what they want to be, how they want to get there, and just understanding that there are multiple avenues and opportunities and paths that people can take outside of just going to work 9 to 5 for a company.
Gotcha. So, let's break that down a little bit. You think that on the front end, before they really start to figure out what path to go, they need to think about what type of almost it's I can't even call it a career. That's what's confusing. The freelance path. So that's the path that you took. You would probably call more of a freelance path, would you say?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, I look at, my little brother, for example, he's 22, and he's now starting to do his own videography and photography stuff. He put up his own website, and he's kind of taking that more entrepreneurial path. And he's really young, right? So he doesn't have to go work for a large company to be able to make a living doing what he wants to do. It doesn't mean that he can't or won't, but he doesn't have to. And so I think what's really important for people, working for these large or traditional organizations, I think is certainly a good experience. There's nothing wrong with going to do it for a year and seeing how you like it and how you feel about it. But I don't think people should feel pressure that that's the only way that they can survive and that's the only way they can live. And if it doesn't work out, it's going to be horrible. There are a lot of options and opportunities for people that they can take. And you can do some of these things at the same time. I mean, you can have a full-time job, and in the evenings you do freelance work. In the evenings you drive for Uber. In the evenings you make things and sell them on Etsy. So you can do both at the same time. And I know a lot of people that have done that. And once their independent freelance work starts to grow, they leave their full-time gigs. So I don't think we should think of jobs and employment in the traditional sense. A lot of people talk about this as having a portfolio of companies that you work with. So I think we're starting to see that happen, or starting to see that approach become more common. don't look at an organization as a career, look at it as one of your portfolio of companies that you work for.
That's really interesting. I think that that's exactly kind of what I'm doing here. I have a full-time job. I'm working on Occupational Olivia, so I'm thinking, I
Yeah,
like that. So you're really just diversifying your options. You're not putting all
yeah.
your eggs in the organization. Okay, that makes
What's your
sense.
what's your full-time gig?
Manager of talent and organizational development. Very long job title, but basically everything in the talent bucket for my company I kind of work with.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I know a lot of people in the talent space,
Hmm.
and some people stay at it. Some people go do freelance work afterwards. So it's exactly like what you're doing, right? And I did the same thing. You build up sort of your personal brand, and you see where that goes. That
Hmm.
eventually could lead to a book deal. That could lead to a speaking tour. That could lead to all sorts of different things that you don't know what's going to happen. And that's what happened to me, right? I had a full-time job, but I had a blog. I started doing guest contributions. I got approached with a book deal that turned into speaking, that turned into another book, and it's just sort of the need for relying on an organization became much less important for me.
Yeah, what's really interesting about the way you did it is you didn't have an outcome or a vision you were pushing towards. You just kind of adapted as it evolved, and that's
Yeah,
what I think is interesting.
my goal was do not work for other people because that sucked. So
Got it.
that was the only thing going through my head. What can I do to not work for a company? And I did, like I said, article writing, SEO. I mean, you name it, and I was doing it. Um, my logic was always, what's the worst that could happen? If everything fails, I go back home and live with my parents in LA. Yeah, I'm sure they would love that, right? So, um, so for me, there wasn't that much risk. I had enough money saved up after working my full-time job where I knew that if I didn't make a single penny for the next year, I would be okay. And I was thinking, all right, there's no way that I'm not going to make a penny in a year. I'm going to make something in a year, right? I mean, I'm not an idiot. Like if I have to go work at Starbucks, I'll go work at Starbucks. I'll make something. So, from that perspective, it just gave me the freedom and the opportunity to go in the direction I wanted to go.
Nice. No, that's really cool. I like that. So I'll move on to the next question. So one of the trends you talk about you in the beginning of the book is the new behaviors shaping the future of work. And so
Yep.
what are these behaviors and how can we adapt to those if we're trying to kind of prepare for the future?
Yeah, so there are a lot of new behaviors that we're starting to see. I mean, the easiest way to see it is looking at our personal lives, how we use a lot of these technologies, how we communicate and collaborate, how we share, how we learn and teach and educate each other. I mean, how we buy things online, how we give feedback to each other. In our personal lives, it's much different than the way it is within our companies. In our personal lives, it's easy for us to find information. It's easy for us to use the tools that we want. We share information all the time on Twitter. We put up pictures on Facebook and status updates. We use Instagram. So these behaviors of how we share and collaborate and communicate and sort of live a more public life are being translated into our organizations. I mean, why is it so easy for you and I to chat on Skype, yet it's so hard within our organizations to make that happen? Why is it so easy for us to find information on Google, but so hard to find information inside of our companies? So these are all new behaviors fueled by technologies that organizations are really starting to have to think about. And it's really forcing them to change. I mean, another good example is, we are, most of us, reasonably responsible people. We pay for mortgages, we pay for our cars, we can take care of bills and expenses. Yet inside of our companies, we have to get approval to buy a stapler or a pencil or an office chair. So the behaviors that we have in our personal lives are very different to the behaviors that we are seeing in our organizations. And I think the bigger that gap becomes, the more disengaged our employees start to become.
No,
Because we
that's really
start,
interesting.
I mean, we start to wonder, like, hey, it's so easy for me to talk to Olivia and to find information and to learn about what she's doing. How come it's so hard within my company to do these things? Or it's so easy for me if I have an idea to share it on a blog or in an article. But if I have an idea in my company, what the hell am I going to do with it? Do I email it to 1,000 people? Like I have nowhere to. So there's this big disconnect between how we live and how we work, and it's in very, very different decades. And so that's really forcing organizations to change.
No, I know now. I know exactly what you're talking about now that you're kind of painting the picture for me, because there's more hierarchy still in a lot of companies that prevent that, and bureaucracy, I think, is
Yeah.
what those is that what you're getting at as far as the restraints?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a big part of it. There's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of office politics, there's a lot of rules and processes that have been in existence since before we were born, since these companies were first started. And they've been like that since the companies have been around. And nobody's ever questioned them, nobody's challenged them, nobody thought about if these things still make sense. We just kind of carry on. And so I think we finally reached a point within our organizations, because of these 5 trends that I talk about in the book, that are coming together to really force organizations to re-examine all these common assumptions we've had around work. And it's forcing companies to ask these very basic questions that have really big impacts.
No, that makes sense. That's completely true. I see it every day.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, everybody sees it all the time. It's within our companies. The easiest simple example is flexible work environments. For years we've been saying, do I really need to commute? Like, do I have to leave my house to come into the office? And now this is one of the hottest discussions that a lot of companies are starting to think about, right? It's getting center attention. Open office spaces is another one. Like, do we have to sit in a cubicle? Can we have choice for the technologies that we use and when we work and where we work and what our offices look like? So these are all very basic concepts that nobody's ever thought to challenge over the last 100 years.
That'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So another thing that you cover in the book is the skills gap, and just in general a skills gap in the workforce. What skills do you think there's going to be the most gaps in, and what areas could people maybe prepare to think about how they can keep up with that?
Sure. So there are a lot of skills gaps that are being discussed in a lot of different areas. I mean, I've heard companies talk about everything from the inability to find marketing and technical people to manufacturing. They're having a hard time finding actual physical engineers, not software engineers, but actual engineers, and people that can do heating and plumbing and kind of work with their hands more. So this idea of the skills gap is basically looking at the skills that organizations want versus the skills that employees have, and being able to match those two closer together. I mean, if we look at the future, I think just from a knowledge worker or a learning worker perspective, the big areas are around data, data scientists, data engineers. These types of people, I think, are very much in demand for a lot of organizations, and I think there's not a lot of people that are that have the skills to be able to meet those needs. So that's just one example of where a skills gap I think we can easily see. We see wearable devices, we see all these new technologies coming into our companies, which means more data, more information. How do we make sense of it? So bringing in people that can come into a company that can look at all this data and make sense of it and analyze it and figure out what it means, I think that's a very, very valuable big skill that we'll see needed over the next 10 years, but there's not a lot of those types of people. So if you like math and you like science, I think that's definitely a very, very good place to go.
Okay. And you mentioned something about the knowledge worker too. So versus learning worker, I'm trying to understand a little bit more. So it sounds like it's just all about to be competitive, you have to learn as fast as possible. Is that what you meant by the moving away from the knowledge worker to the learning worker?
Yeah, so it's not just this idea of being able to learn as fast as possible, but be able to apply what you learn to your current environment.
Got it.
So I always tell people to be the smartest person in the room, all you need is a smartphone. So what you know isn't as valuable as your ability to learn new things and to apply those things to the work environment that you're currently in. So if you want to ask me anything, I can probably Google it. Same thing for you. I can ask you anything you want, and you'll find an answer to it. So your knowledge and a lot of the things that we've learned in school aren't as valuable. But for example, if I say, here's a tool, or here's a device, or here's, like social media is a great example. Learn how to use social media to build a business and to market yourself. That's a new skill, right? You didn't learn how to do that in school. So that's an example of being able to learn something new and being able to apply that to something that you're doing, such as building a business. So that's probably the simplest example I can point to. So it's not so much of what you know and what you've been taught, but how quickly you can learn new things as the world is changing, and how quickly you can apply those new things that you're learning to whatever the goals and objectives of the business might be.
Got it. So the application part is really what I was missing there, and it sounds like just being able to know it well enough to use and know when to use it and how to use it. Okay, that makes sense.
Exactly.
So I have a lot of people that follow that are earlier in their career. They're highly educated, a lot of graduate degrees. I'm curious, for those people listening, what would you say? They don't have a lot of experience, but how would you advise them to go about today on future-proofing their career?
Sure. Experience is one of those things I always got very frustrated with, because I would apply for jobs and they'd say you don't have enough experience, and I'd say, well, I can't freaking get experience because you won't hire me, and it's this really horrible catch-22. So I think this whole concept of what experience do you have it's a very, very frustrating one, especially for people that are just trying to enter the workforce or to apply for jobs, because and we saw this again with social media, that people were hiring jobs and they were saying, oh, you have to have like 10 years of social media experience. And people were saying, what the hell are you talking about? Social media has been around for like 6 years. How are you going to have somebody that has 10 years of experience? So thankfully, there are a lot of ways that you can learn things outside of a traditional university, right? You can go to Coursera or Khan Academy. You can go to Udemy. So you can learn all sorts of new skills and things that are applicable to your job. For me, a lot of my initial jobs, they said, oh yeah, do you know how to do this? And I would just say, yeah. I mean, I had no freaking clue how to do any of the things. But you know what? I had no choice. I had to tell people that I knew how to do these things, because otherwise I wouldn't get the job. And so it was a little bit of a fake it until you make it. I always told people, hire me and I'll learn how to do it quickly. Right? It's not, my philosophy when I was applying for jobs was, we're not talking about rocket science here, okay? You need me to learn how to write something. I mean, how hard can it freaking be? You need me to learn how to, I mean, what is it that I need to know that is so hard that you cannot give me this job and let me figure out how to do it in like a week, right? Unless you're applying to be a doctor or a software engineer or something like very complex and technical, like there's absolutely no reason to not give somebody an opportunity. And I personally got so frustrated that I pretty much lied my way into my first job because I was able to talk about these things, not necessarily have experience doing it. And I was like, oh yeah, I can do that. Threw out some terminology at the time. This was a decade ago, and they were like, okay, clearly you know what you're talking about. We'll hire you. And then I just learned on the job. So I think that experience is very much overrated. I think that if a person can demonstrate certain things that they have done for themselves personally, that is also valuable. So for example, if you hire somebody and he says, you ask them, have you ever worked for a large company? Have you ever built like a whole website for them? And they say no. If they have a good-looking website that they've created for themselves, if they've demonstrated that they know how to use these tools and technologies in their, in their personal life, hey, guess what? That guy has experience doing it. It doesn't matter that he hasn't been doing it for, these Fortune 100 companies. So that's always been my mentality. A lot of companies don't agree with that, right? They always want, oh, let me look at your cover letter. Let me look at your, you have 20 years being an administrative assistant. Oh, sorry, I can't hire you. So I think all that sort of stuff is complete BS. And I think we will get to a point where companies will realize that and start to see that. And there have been some cool initiatives that have been going on. Mozilla has something called an Open Badges project, where you can get badges for skills that you obtain, and then you can show those badges to employers that are looking to hire you. And these are badges that you get for classes that you might take, for projects that you complete, anything like that. So I think we're starting to see a little bit of a shift towards how we can demonstrate our skills.
No, I think you're right. I think we're getting forced that way because hiring managers will put a long list of qualifications, but they never really get everything that they wish for. So I think that your approach is really dead on because at the end of the day, those aren't deal breakers, but at the beginning they go into it expecting it to be. So I've had to do the same thing to get my first job out of college. It was they want you to have all these skills, but they don't give us those skills in college, so you have to figure it out on your own and close those gaps. So that was good.
Yeah. I mean, it's very frustrating for somebody that tries to enter the workforce. So I feel everyone's pain. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I went off on my own because I just got so fed up. I was like, all right, the hell with everybody. I'm doing my own freaking thing. Like it's because it doesn't make any sense.
Right, exactly. Okay, so last question for you. I want to know a little bit more about what you're working on right now at the futureorganization.com.
So a couple of different things actually. I guess my work is broken down into a couple areas. So I have the book that came out at the end of last year. So a lot of what I do is around speaking engagements, thought leadership opportunities with various companies, webinars, white papers, that whole thought leadership side. I run something called the FOW community. It's the Future of Work community, where we have organizations from around the world that participate in this community where we host events and explore the future of work together. We have around 40 brands in there from around the world, ranging from companies like T-Mobile and Cemex to Whirlpool and MasterCard and Wells Fargo. So these companies have this online environment where they communicate and share ideas, and we host events and give them resources. I also do a lot of public-facing content, podcasts, videos, articles that I write. And I'm going to be launching a show in the next few months called the Future of Work Show, where I basically go inside of organizations and interview executives and employees to get a sense of how they think the world of work is changing. So that's my big project that I have coming up that I'm going to be focusing on.
Oh, that's cool. So that's you were testing it out with LinkedIn this past week?
Yeah, I mean, with LinkedIn, I didn't test it out that much. I did a little bit of an office tour. But it wasn't, I didn't speak with any employees there, and the conversation wasn't so much around how do you see the workplace changing. It was specifically around HR and the role that Pat Waters has. But similar to that, except it's going to be professionally shot, professionally edited. We're going to build out a whole site for this, and it's going to be really exploring what the future of work is going to look like.
That's exciting. I'll be definitely tuning in.
Yes, that's going to be the next big project that'll be rolling out. I think the first episode will probably premiere at the end of July or the beginning of August, hopefully, if everything goes well.
Nice. Well, good luck, and I look forward to seeing it. And thanks again for being so generous with your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure.